Tonight on the SDG-Hub, we'll be discussing the topic World Environment Day, Solutions to Plastics Pollution. And to discuss this, we have Michael Affordofe, Head of Environmental Health Department at the Accra School of Hygiene, Kolebu, and also Kwame Asamoa Mensa-Yawson, Manager at the Ghana National Plastic Action Partnership. Business PM is proudly brought to you in partnership with the Center for Sustainable Transformation. This is the SDG-Hub. And of course, every Tuesday, we discuss opportunities and solutions for everyday business to achieving Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, as we call them for short. Well, as you probably know by now, the SDGs are 17 goals with targets and indicators for sustainable development. They were agreed on by the United Nations member states, including Ghana, to make the world a more just, equitable, greener, and peaceful place by the year 2030. On the SDG Hub, we introduce you to business opportunities and activities that help achieve the SDG goals here in Ghana and beyond. My name is Emmanuel, Aboagye-Wiafe, and once again, I'm here with co-host
Rosemary Balami.
She's from the Young Reporters for the Environment YRE at the Center for Sustainable Transformation. World Environment Day is the biggest international day for the environment, led by the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, and organized annually on the 5th of June since 1973. It has grown to be the largest global platform for environmental outreach. The day is celebrated by millions of people across the world, and with this year's celebration around the corner, we'll be discussing the theme Solutions to Plastic Pollution, which focuses on solutions to plastics pollution under the campaign #Beat Plastic Pollution. It is a reminder that everybody's actions on plastic pollution matters. Previously, we have discussed the possible impact of the new national policies on plastics pollution, as well as the role of education in changing people's mindset towards what each and every one of us can do to reduce the environmental and health catastrophe plastics are causing in our country and globally.
Emmanuel, just listen to some of these numbers gathered by the Ghana National Plastic Action Partnership, Ghana NPAP, represented in the studio here today. The expected growth of plastic leakage into the country's water bodies is projected to increase to 190% from 2020 to 2040. If we do not do something drastically, we will have a total of 5.3% annual growth of municipal plastic waste that is left aside from industrial, institutional, and commercial plastic waste. Can you imagine? Everybody has seen how it is like now. Imagine an increase of 190%. The aim of the World Environment Day is to inspire and empower individuals and communities to take action for a healthier, cleaner, and greener planet. And we hope our listeners get inspired after today.
Absolutely. And we have a fantastic lineup tonight. We are pleased to be joined in the studio by seasoned experts who will help us explore the impact of plastic pollution on our environment and real solutions to addressing this issue. So let's dive right in here, and let me introduce my guest, Michael Affordofe, Head of Department, Environmental Health, Accra School of Hygiene, is here, and also Kwame Asamoa Mensa-Yawson, he's the Manager, Ghana National Plastic Action Programme, GNAP. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Emmanuel.
We've had Kwame here before.
Yeah, this is my second time, yeah.
Second time, all right. Yeah. So welcome again.
Thank you.
Let me quickly start with your introduction, and let me start with Michael. Michael, I would like to know the real pronunciation of your name.
Yes, it's Affordofe.
Affordofe?
Yes, okay. Affordofe.
Affordofe, all right.
Yeah.
Right, so tell me what you do at your place of work.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Michael Affordofe. I'm the Head of Department at the Accra School of Hygiene. The Accra School of Hygiene is a school that trains environmental health practitioners, occupational health and safety practitioners, and occupational therapy practitioners for the country and beyond. And basically, we build capacity to empower these young ones to go out there to help to solve the myriad of public health challenges, including environmental health challenges out there. So that's what we do.
Right, impressive. Let me come to you, Kwame. For those of our listeners who did not see and hear you for the first time, that time that you came, what do you do at GNAP?
Okay, great. So my name is Kwame. I work with the Ghana National Plastic Action Partnership, as you've mentioned, as the manager. And the NPAP is an initiative of the Global Plastic Action Partnership. And for Ghana, it's a collaboration between the Global Plastic Action Partnership, which is GPAP, and the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation. And the goal is to create a multi-stakeholder platform that brings together different partners from government, private sector, civil society, and international organizations to come together and then come up with activities and actions that can address plastic pollution in Ghana. So that is the goal of the NPAP, a multi-stakeholder platform for engagement between different stakeholders.
Right, fantastic. Let's start the discussion now, and I'm starting with you, Michael. Could you enlighten us about the severity of plastic pollution and its impact on our planet today?
All right, so thank you very much. I'm happy to be here this evening. Plastics is now part of us, and I'm sure my listeners will agree with me that day in, day out, we use plastics for so many things, and we cannot live without it. But all the same, it's posing a lot of challenges to us, especially to our environment and to our health. To talk about the environment, we all agree, we all know that the plastics, some of them are actually not properly managed, especially at the household level, institutional level. And these plastics are sometimes disposed indiscriminately into the environment. Some of them are burnt. And one other issue that is so dear to my heart that I want to talk about is the issue of the marine environment, where most of these plastics, when they end up into the drains and the gutters, runoff water carries all these things into the ocean. That has a larger impact on the lives of the marine lives. And these are issues that we think we need to address as a matter of urgency, because a time will come, our protein deficiency will actually be an issue, and we'll have issues with our lives, because some of these things are supportive in human growth and development, especially good food and nutrition. And if you go to catch fish and you end up catching plastics, what will you end up consuming? And this is so alarming. So it is important that we address plastics and find solutions to the plastics at the source, especially where it is coming from, so that we can protect our marine environment, our terrestrial environments, and also human health.
So in your role as the head of Department of the Environmental Health at the School of Hygiene in Ghana, what role can you play, or does education play in all this, in combating plastic pollution? Yeah,
education is very essential. And for us in academic institutions, we have a role to play in research and also in training. And in addition to that, we must also ensure as educational institutions that we also put in strategies to be able to, our immediate environment to be made very clean and safe. So we also joined the campaign on Eco School campus, so that we as educational institutions can also try to make our educational institutions plastic free. Then we can go a long way to also impact this idea into the larger community. So basically, we are into research, we are into training, and we are also trying to also practice what we preach.
And so you're talking about effective strategies. What are some of these strategies that you think education institutions can adopt to reduce the effects of plastic pollution?
So as educational institutions, I want to say that we need to try to be very much involved in research on the effects of plastics, because not much is known about this, especially in our part of the world. I know the likes of Prof. Gordon and the others at the University of Ghana have done a lot of papers in that, but we still need more, especially on the various types of plastics, the polypropylene, the polyethylene, the PET bottles, and all these forms of plastics. We need to know exactly the kind of impact it will have on us, and especially the microplastics, which are very minute and can penetrate any of the soft tissues that we have in our system, our hearts, our lungs, our liver. All these things can be affected by some of these microplastics. Beyond the education, as educational institutions, we live within communities. So we need to make sure that we actually try to make our school environment plastic free by trying to have source separation of waste in our educational institutions, and see how we can try to identify some material recovery facilities and transport some of these plastics to these material recovery facilities for them to be recycled.
Are all plastics toxic? Would you say all plastics are toxic, or some are less?
We have various levels of toxicity, if you ask me. And when you look at, for instance, the the persistent organic pollutants are actually released when we set fire into plastics. And some of these POPs, when they are released into the environment, they contain dioxins and furans. Okay. And when we end up inhaling some of these dioxins and furans, they are quite carcinogens. So this can lead to some health hazards on our lungs, on our liver, and some of them are less toxic. But the issue is that we don't want to look at it from that perspective. Plastics are not safe for us. Therefore, we need to find a way to see how we can look out for the best alternatives so that we can minimize its use and, if possible, get rid of it entirely from our system. That is where we are looking at the moment.
Okay. Let me come to you, Kwame. Now, you are looking at your action or your activities at the SDG-Hub. You have a task force that is working on awareness, and Rose has told me YRE is part of it. Now, are these huge systematic problems that plastic is a result of really the people or individuals to solve?
No, so it's good you've talked about it. I think we all identify that education and awareness is one key pillar that we need to address plastic pollution. And the Behavior Task Force is looking at exactly that, bringing together different stakeholders who are working in this area to drive awareness. And we have been thinking around two areas we will focus action on in the immediate term. We realize that, we have been talking about recycling, but can we also look at ways we can get people to reuse and then also to reduce as well, right? So for the campaign that we're going to be running through the NPAP task force this year, that will be the focus. And already we have consultants who are on the ground trying to engage people to understand how they manage their plastics, because we also want to make sure that whatever campaign message that is coming out is well tailored to address a specific issue that people are facing. So not just doing a campaign for a campaign's sake, but going out.
When you talk about reuse, are we not then, like defeating the purpose for which we are actually advocating for? Because the impression is that plastics should be done away with. So what about reusing? Can you explain that?
Okay, great. So when you talk about plastics in country, and the last time I was here with the representative from the Ministry of Environment, right. And what he talked about, which is really instructive for us to look at, is that Ghana is looking at a circular economy model for managing plastics. So we're not just looking at phasing out plastics entirely, but what are the other ways that we can manage plastics, right? So how can we use it? How can we ensure that maybe we're reducing the use of plastics? How can we ensure that we are recycling it? So we're not just looking at just the phasing out. And even when it comes to the phasing out, there are a number of considerations that also need to come into play. And those are some of the discussions that we're currently even having at the NPAP, that if we're going ahead to maybe gradually phase out some plastics, what are the considerations that needs to be taken into account? Because there are a number of factors that come into account. So just highlighting that the goal for Ghana, as it's been set, is not a total ban on plastics, but how can we enable a circular economy that manages plastics in an effective way, which includes reduce, reuse, recycling, and all that.
Well, so this year's theme is centered on solutions to plastic pollution. Can you give some examples of successful interventions or innovations that have been implemented through the partnership to mitigate plastic pollution?
Interesting question. There are a lot to talk about, and let me just use this point to highlight one document that we published somewhere last year. And we realized that there were so many innovations in country that we needed to celebrate. And so that document has about 45 case studies where you can go in and read about it. I'll try not to be biased, because I know there might be other partners listening to me, so I'll try and mention a few of them that come to mind. So at the collection side, there are a number of stakeholders doing activities. So you have the likes of CEST, Koleba, helping out with collection. We also have the likes of organizations like SPECS, who are encouraging people to reduce the plastic packaging that they use in when you are ordering for food and all that. We also have recycling organizations such as Asaase Foundation, who are helping in recycling some of plastics. We have E360, for example. We have Nelplast, who is also helping turn some of the plastics into blocks that can be used in infrastructure. So there are a number of initiatives happening, and recently we did publish a video documentary with the Global Plastic Action Partnership, which highlights some of these stakeholders who are doing something in the space, and we'll be happy to share with you for you to look at. I mean,
lovely.
Yeah, there are a number of activities happening in the space.
You've actually mentioned, some of the innovative approaches and all that. I don't know, but in terms of technology, do you think Ghana as a country, have you come across any technology that you've used, in the fight against plastic pollution?
Great. So there was this one technology platform that we're working, the partners on the NPAP, some of them were looking at, which was called the SAP platform, which was to enable transparency and visibility in the space. And I understand there has been some challenges with that, but I found that could be one interesting technology which could be developed. And I know there are conversations in the space where there are other parties who have similar platforms that we should be seeing in the coming months and years, where we have transparency on where people are sourcing their plastics from, having transparency on how much people are paid to ensure there's fair pricing and all that. Yeah.
So, away from that, how can individuals and communities actively participate in reducing plastic waste in their daily lives?
Great. So I think there are a number of factors that they can look at. So number one, are there ways that you can have another item replaced? So for example, you're going to buy food and you think that you have, so for example, what Specs is trying to model, can you use maybe a reusable bowl, for example, instead of a plastic item? There are also plans where we can also segregate our waste as well, right? And then there are collection points that you can send your plastics to. I know people are like, where can I take my plastics to? There are quite a number of infrastructure points where you can take your plastics to for collection and recycling. So we encourage people to also segregate. And then, like you talked about, education is important. We might think that people know, but we still need to let people know, right? So in your actions, in your way, for example, how can you maybe sometimes use a reusable bottle and influence somebody to also adopt the same, right? So those are some of the actions that we can take to educate people.
So we always, when it comes to tackling plastic pollution, we look at the communities and all that. Are there any successful case studies or initiatives you can share where communities or some communities in Ghana have effectively tackled plastic pollution?
Sure. I know there will be some that will come to mind, but let me try and mention this. Okay. So there's one case study in the Plastic Action Initiative tracker where the Green Africa Youth Organization is pioneering what we call a zero waste initiative in one of the communities in Ashanti region. Okay. And it's really an interesting read in terms of what is happening there. I might not be able to come up with all the details here, but that is that's one that you can
What about you?
Yeah, I think I have one community in mind.
Oh, okay.
I just want to share. I mean, what we all read about that community, Asin Kusha.
Asin Kusha.
Yeah.
Which region?
It's in the central region.
Okay.
The opinion leaders are very much interested in what happens in their environments. So they have a strategy in place that when you are found littering that environment, you are made to immediately pick up the waste and even asked to buy bins to pick other waste around where you dump that waste. And we have to pay a visit to that community. I learned the community is now free from plastics, and they don't have any item of plastic anywhere. It's applicable to both the indigenes and even visitors.
Oh, okay.
And we want to, applaud the chiefs and elders for that great initiative.
So, what role do you think policy and legislation can play in addressing this issue?
A lot, plastic management is multidimensional. Policy, government, they have a role to play. The business community have a role to play. The local authority and the communities have a role to play. When we look at the policy perspective, I know Ghana has a national plastic policy, which we are all trying to work towards achieving some of the pillars in the national plastic policy, and key among them is the issue of behavioral change and also coming up with the innovations to replace some of these plastics that we have in the environment. And I think it's that policy that is driving all our efforts towards achieving these great the initiatives we are all discussing here today. So I think that is very instrumental. And also with legislation, there is a need for us to be able to regulate our activities, and sometimes we have very brilliant legislations. I can talk about the Electronic Waste Management Act. Several other acts are there that talks about waste management and what we should do to be able to tackle it. Even our bylaws in our communities are there. But the bigger gap that exists is how do we enforce some of these bylaws to be able to make sure people are really doing what they are expected to do.
Right.
So these are the issues that we need to be looking at going forward.
Okay. Now you mentioned a community, Asinkusha.
Yep.
Now, do we also have like a test company or organization that is actually practicing successful strategies to reduce?
I know that the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, through the support from the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions Secretariat, is trying to implement series of pilot projects on plastics. And the project is aimed at finding pragmatic solutions to managing plastics in country. And one of the projects is on the plastic-free schools, where the ministry is working closely with the Accra Technical Training Center and also the St. John Bosco Basic School at Tema. Currently, I'm aware that the St. John Bosco Basic School in Tema are trying to do away with plastics entirely from their school environments. Wow. And basically what they are doing is to see how they can involve the parents of these children to try and get reusable bottles and bowls for these kids if they are coming to school. So that instead of using plastics, they end up using some of these bowls and cups for food and water. They are also trying to see how they can separate waste in their school environments. Their school canteens are largely involved in this activity. And going forward, we want to see how we can empower them to go into the use of some of these biodegradable products in packaging food, or use of the reusable bowls in serving food instead of using plastics. And the teachers are very instrumental in making sure this is successful because they teach their school children. So at their level, the teacher-based curriculum reviews are done to see how they can train these young ones on the effects of plastics to human health and environment, and how they can be responsible to the management of plastics. So these are things that are happening in Ghana here that I think we have to learn from it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yes. So now let me come back to you, Kwame. As you know, Ghana NPAP focused on plastic pollution. Are there any challenges or obstacles that you've encountered in implementing solutions to plastic pollution, and how can they be overcome?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about the collaboration again. I think we're still seeing different works being done in silos, and until we all try to, as much as possible, align our work in one way, we will still have challenges in implementation, because organization A is doing this, organization B is doing that, and that's what we're trying to work to implement. Again, from the SMEs point of view, they will also talk about issues around funding. Sustainable funding for institutions to really scale up the activity. So you see people doing activities, rolling out initiatives, but how can they get sustained funding so that they can scale those activities to a level that makes systematic impact in the ecosystem? So those are the two challenges I would highlight. All
right, great. So then we keep saying, education and awareness campaigns and all that. This education and awareness campaign thing, how can this play a role in changing consumer behavior and promoting sustainable alternatives to single-use plastics?
Great. I think it's all about the messaging that goes out there, right? And earlier was talking about how can we have targeted messages that send across what really people need to do. And that comes from understanding what the challenge and the problem is. Because sometimes we think that, okay, this is the challenge, let's go about with this message, people will listen. But when you actually go to the ground, that's when you realize that people have, and the other time at the Behavior Task Force, we did some exercise where we went out to speak to some people, and you would find out the different perspectives people have as to why they are not managing plastic. Or some people would say, okay, I feel it's too much of work. Somebody would say, I feel that I don't have the necessary infrastructure. So gathering that information and understanding what the problem is will be able to create an opportunity where we have targeted messages that address people and their needs, and that could encourage action because it's addressing the challenge that they have.
So let me ask you this, as a partnership, as Ghana NPAP, do you agree to banning single-use plastics?
No, so I think from the platform and the discussions we've had, one of the things that is clear is that, number one, we need to look at a circular economy model for Ghana. Number two, there could be some plastics that could be gradually phased out of the system. But what we need to discuss is the approach and the manner in which it's done, and what could be considered what we call, for example, problematic or necessary plastics. What is the criteria? How should they be phased out? What should be the timeline? What are the policies and legislations that needs to come into play to force that? Are there alternatives in place that we can point people to when this particular item is taken out? So it's something that is being discussed in terms of phasing out, but not a total ban, because that's most of the feedback that we're getting is that we need to look at a phase out, but we also need to look at the approach in which the phasing out is done.
Okay, so on the issue of alternatives, for instance, what are some sustainable alternatives to plastic that we would recommend, and how accessible are these to the general public?
Yeah, so that's one area that we really need to drum home, right? Because a lot of people are asking, so, I mean, if I'm not using this, what should I do, right? And last time at one of the discussions at the NPAP Task Force, we brought one of the organizations called EcoSolve, who is trying to come up with some items in terms of bags that are not made necessarily from polymers, that are made from plastic. Okay. That could be one of the innovations that we drive. But I know there are other innovations in there that we still need to shine some light on in terms of getting people to know about the alternative. But there are some in there, and one of them is EcoSolve, like I've mentioned. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, wrapping up, how can we encourage adoption of a circular economy, that kind of approach to plastic waste management, where materials are reused, recycled, or repurposed rather than discarded? Michael?
Yeah, I think this whole thing about plastics is all inclusive. So we want to call on the government, the business community, the local authorities, institutions to see plastics as a problem that needs to be tackled heads on. So all of us have a role to play in a very small way. Like, for instance, if you are a head of an institution, what strategies do you have in place to be able to sort out the plastics from the other waste? And if you sort this waste out, where exactly are you sending them to? Are you able to identify any nearest plastic recovery facility that this can be sent to for it to be recycled or reused? For the governments, I know they have a lot of strategies in place. They are developing their policies. They are trying to seek for the financial support. The business community has a role to play. For them, they must come up with the innovative ideas. They must give us the necessary funding that we need to be able to drive some of these policies. And our local authorities must also be seen to be responsible. Our individuals in our communities also need to be responsible to their environment. I mean, if we collectively put all these things together, I am sure we'll be addressing the issues of plastics. On the issue of the alternatives that you asked earlier, I know there are edible and compostable packaging, products that we can start looking out for. For instance, the sachet water bags that we are drinking, we can replace them with edible water. That after drinking the water, we can throw the package out there that can easily biodegrade in the environment. So these are things we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This brings us to the end of our World Environment Day 2023 special program. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today and sharing your expertise and valuable insights. It has been an enlightening discussion. I want to remind all our listeners that each one of us has the power to make a difference. Let's join hands to preserve our beautiful planet. Make sure to tune in same time next week as we continue discussions on all things sustainable development right here on Asaase Radio 99.5 so that people and the planet can prosper. If you have any topics you would like us to discuss, shoot an email to info@cest.org or send a message to our social media platforms at Wayari Ghana. Also, don't forget to vote for my co-host, Emmanuel Aboagye-Wiafe, for the Energy Media Personality of the Year Award to short code *920*86#. Enter nomination code TE5 for the Think Energy SDGs Awards 2023.
Thank you so much for staying with us on the SDG-Hub. We've been speaking with Michael Affordofe, Head of Environmental Health Department at the Accra School of Hygiene, Kolebu, and Kwame Asamoa Mensa-Yawson, Manager at the Ghana National Plastic Action Plan. I've been your host, Emmanuel Aboagye-Wiafe, and I did this with
Rosemary Balami.
Let's go back to BQ.